Hey guys, Ron here. Boy, it's a warm night. I mean, warmest night of the year so far. It's only 68 degrees, but it's humid, so it feels warm. I've got videos from here wearing serious jackets, but not tonight. Anyway, so tonight, guys, I apologize again. I haven't been able to get out and do any locations or homes in the last couple weeks. So tonight's going to be a discussion-only video. I'm going to try to keep it to 20 minutes. You don't have to watch the whole thing. You don't have to watch any of it if you don't want to watch a discussion-only video. I'm here at Fisherman's Village. I'm going to show you the boats and the sea and the creatures a little bit, and hopefully it'll be interesting to look at. Somebody's really coughing back there. Usually there's nobody here. It's too cold for people, but they're actually strolling after dinner, I guess, tonight because the weather's nicer. Anyway, tonight's discussion is on Marilyn Monroe, specifically the strange and mysterious death of Marilyn Monroe. Now, I go by Marilyn's house in Brentwood. I don't say a lot, but I go several times a year. I walk the dog by there, and I've done a video. I've actually done 2 videos from there. And the last one I did, I go into this subject in depth, it was a year ago, maybe more. But it wasn't getting the kind of play that I would like. I don't know why, even I'm at the location. I'm going to talk about the same subject tonight, Marilyn Monroe's mysterious death, and maybe there'll be more interest generated also because at the time of this filming, there is a documentary on, I believe, Netflix, and it's pretty good, and it's recordings that Anthony Summers, who wrote the book Goddess, I guess it's just going to make his book popular again. I bought the book. He wrote it in the late 80s. He had recordings with some of the principals, people that were still alive in the mid 80s. And anyway, that's on Netflix now. I don't remember the name of it, but it's about Marilyn, and it's recordings that Tony Summers did with, like I said, some of the principals, the usual suspects, Jeannie Carmen, but Eunice Murray, actually, the maid, the psychiatric nurse in reality, but Marilyn's housekeeper who discovered her body. She did an interview with Anthony Summers. Anyway, so maybe there's a little more interest in the case right now, even though it's, 60 years old right now. So let's look at something interesting besides me. I'm a little revved up because I just had a chocolate cupcake, and I don't eat much sugar anymore. I try to eat sugar-free. I don't have to, but my father had diabetes. My brother has diabetes. I'm 10 years younger than my brother. My father's passed away, like 30 years ago, not from diabetes though. So I try to limit my sugar now in the last year or so. I just thought it'd be a good idea, and I ate some sugar now, and I'm all revved up. Ha ha ha. Yeah, don't take drugs, don't drink coffee, but the sugar is getting to me. Anyway, let's talk more about Marilyn, and maybe I can shut up. So, we all know, or some of us know, about Marilyn Monroe's difficult relationships. I mean, her mother was hospitalized, institutionalized for mental illness. Her grandmother was institutionalized for mental illness. She grew up in foster homes. Her real name was Norma Jean Baker. She didn't even know really who her father was. She fantasized it was Clark Gable, and probably, I wonder if she told him that on the set of The Misfits, which was her last film and his last film. Supposedly he said, "That girl's going to give me a heart attack," and then he came home and right after filming had a heart attack and died. And I think Marilyn went to Kay Gable and apologized for being such so troubled on the set. But Marilyn Monroe, Norma Jean Baker had, I don't know, how do I phrase it? She was, look, I was an actor, a stage actor, not a film actor. Chose to be a stage actor, a painter. I'm creative. Which brings me joy in life. Creative people tend to be neurotic, sometimes full out crazy, full on, really certifiable, as they used to say. Most are just kind of neurotic and eccentric, anxiety, depression, mood swings. Seems to go with the creative mind. But Marilyn Monroe had apparently the genetics, at least some of them are her mother and grandmother, and you add the fame and the pressures of that and her inability to conceive. She wanted a child badly, although she also had abortions, which is kind of, you'd think, contradictory, but and her inability to find a loving relationship. So Marilyn Monroe, By 1962, Marilyn is 36 years old, but she's still this, the major sex symbol of Hollywood, along with others. But she's still a major sex symbol and a major box office draw. And she had been married to a guy named Jim Doherty during World War II. And the problem was, among other problems, I don't think Marilyn actually could ever stay with one man. And I'm not saying because she was too promiscuous, although she was promiscuous, or what we call promiscuous at times. She was a player, so to speak, a female player at various times. I don't think she could be interested in one man. I don't know, because Jim Doherty, she was young and they were stationed on Catalina, and he was gone away for long periods of time. She was bored out of her skull. And then she became, from Norma Jean Baker, she was suddenly Marilyn Monroe. She was a thing, a commodity. She was a famous celebrity, extraordinarily famous, and she married, one of the most famous baseball players of all time after he retired, Joe DiMaggio. And DiMaggio wanted her to be a stay-at-home San Francisco mom, San Francisco wife, and possibly a mom, and she had, no interest in that. She couldn't give up the fame of being Marilyn Monroe. I mean, they used to tell Elvis to retire and settle down and take it easy and, not have the need for the drugs and the pressure anymore. And they said there was no way. The guy said he couldn't stop being Elvis. They were addicted to the fame and the notoriety. Definitely Marilyn as well. The marriage of Joe DiMaggio only lasted 9 months. There's physical violence involved. He beat her up. They argued terribly. Apparently had a great sex life, but argued like crazy. She married Arthur Miller, renowned author, and apparently he early on sensed that it was a mistake and that she was even more than a handful. But Marilyn had a lot of qualities. They say that besides being obviously physically beautiful, and she was gorgeous, really, but they say that she had, I guess it was her pheromones, I guess it was her estrogen pouring out of her or something, but that she had some kind of a quality that just mesmerized men and made men want to swoop in and not just rescue her, but be with her. She was a real enigma. I mean, she might have played a dumb blonde, but she was intelligent. She had a sense of humor. She was creative. She was interesting. She was definitely wanted to know what was going on in the world. I know for certain if she would have lived, she would have been part of the counterculture. You're too old to be a hippie. She would have been in her early 40s, but she absolutely would have been part of the counterculture, and she would have graduated to smoking marijuana and I'm sure taking LSD, and I don't know if she would have gone beyond that, maybe cocaine, but so would Jack Kennedy, for that matter. I believe they were two of a kind in that way, in the ways of experimentation and expanding your consciousness and your outlook on things. I think she would have been a civil rights. She would have marched in civil rights. Absolutely, I'm sure she would have marched with Martin Luther King, so on and so forth. But with all these things, Marilyn was plagued by insomnia. She could never sleep, and it probably started from, she had night terrors from being at the orphanages and people, she said, coming in at night. Whether she was sexually molested, probably. I don't think we'll ever know for certain. But Marilyn grew up a very troubled individual, and by 1962, I wouldn't say her star was starting to wane. It probably would have if she would have stayed in the business another few years. But she had been contracted to do a film by 20th Century Fox called Something's Gotta Give. Her co-star was Dean Martin and Sid Charisse. And the director was George Cukor. And Cukor, the thing was kind of a mess from the beginning. Marilyn was in the midst of getting out of an affair with the President of the United States. I mean, she had come to the pinnacle. By the way, I mean, there isn't absolute proof of this, but supposedly even within the Kennedy family, they acknowledged that Marilyn and Jack Kennedy had an affair, and Jack Kennedy had affairs with hundreds, probably thousands of women, maybe, I don't know, thousands, but I think I do believe that an affair exists. It sort of was an open secret in Hollywood. And that affair with Jack Kennedy had to end, of course. I mean, she had fantasies of being the First Lady, and the chances that Jack Kennedy was going to divorce Jacqueline and marry Marilyn Monroe because they had fun sleeping together sometimes. She actually complained about his sexual performance, that it was just 1, 2, 3, it's over, goodbye. But I will say, but she was very intrigued by him, and certainly would have loved to have been First Lady of the United States, and fascinated by his mind. And I will also, it brought up the fact that Marilyn also suffered from what was called primary frigidity in those days, but she had a lot of sexual issues. She could not enjoy herself sexually, and she said, there's a number of reasons, from maybe being molested as a child, to fears of the dark, to fears of men because of molestation, to the fact that she said men were always expecting, the great sex goddess, and she felt such pressure to quote unquote perform that she just couldn't enjoy sex, until apparently a guy named Robert F. Kennedy, Jack Kennedy's brother, came into the picture. Now that's the other big rumor, that Marilyn was, that the affair. Okay, so I was talking about the, let's come back, talking about the, there's some people up ahead. Hold on a second. Okay, so they're not going to move out of my way, so I'm going to start again. So apparently the routine was that Bobby Kennedy, the Attorney General, would intervene with his brother-in-law's affairs. Rose Kennedy, the mother, the matriarch, would say, Bobby, Peter Lawford is screwing around on your sister Pat way too blatantly. Tell him to knock it off. Bobby, Steve Smith is fooling around on Jean, your sister Jean, my daughter Jean, too much, blatant, it's embarrassing, tell him to knock it off. So one of Bobby's jobs was to go around and tell his brother-in-laws to quiet down the screwing around they were doing on his sisters, their wives. And he couldn't control Jack, of course, his brother, who he idolized. One said that they said Bobby would put his arm in the fire for Jack Kennedy, his brother. I believe that's true. I believe Bobby would literally give a limb, put his arm in a fire for his brother Jack. Literally. That's how much his devotion and love for him was. And that's why when Jack was killed, which probably had something to do, and I believe it did have something to do with Bobby's persecution of the mob, he never recovered from the guilt of that. Anyway, let's get back to Marilyn. So Bobby Kennedy was sent, supposedly, as, a little dark here, Bobby Kennedy was sent supposedly as, from Jack Kennedy, probably from Rose actually, from his mother, to say, you've got to end this. This is what people were saying, and I don't just mean one or two people in Hollywood. I mean, there's interviews with, it's hard to say a number, 10 people, 20 people. Supposedly it was an open secret in Hollywood that this whole business of the affair with Jack Kennedy, which is why she sang supposedly Happy Birthday, Mr. President, on Jack Kennedy's birthday, and why Jack coached her the way he wanted her to do it, and her affair with Bobby Kennedy. They became open secrets. Now, the one that became dangerous, really dangerous, was the one with Bobby Kennedy, because supposedly Bobby swooped in. His job was to get her away from Jack, but that he swooped in and started having an affair with her. There is even a rumor, and this isn't everywhere, but I've heard in one or two sources, that Ralph Greenson, that she was trying to seduce her psychiatrist, who by the end she was seeing every single day, at her house no less, and became her agent, that she gave a lot of other duties to, that she was desperate to seduce him, and he finally gave in. And having sex with your patient, if that's true, he would certainly have a motivation for wanting her gone if she were going to ever talk about that. But that's another story. We don't know about that one. But the story is that Bobby Kennedy came into Marilyn's life and began an affair with her, and that Marilyn really fell in love with him, and that she would go to dinner parties at Peter Lawford's house, which I've also filmed in Santa Monica at 625 Pacific Coast Highway in Santa Monica, that she would go there and they would be having political discussions around the dinner table, and Marilyn didn't want to forget because Kim Novak seemed to know more than she did, and she was very embarrassed and kind of jealous of Kim. Can you imagine Marilyn being jealous of any woman? So maybe Liz Taylor. And so she started keeping this diary, a red diary, ostensibly to write about things that they were talking about. And then it supposedly became, well, Bobby said, the administration's going to they're going to murder Castro. Bobby said this, Bobby said that. Now, those were, in those days, called pillow talk. That's a guy in a position of power, like the Attorney General of the United States, Bobby Kennedy, her lover, and second most powerful person in the world, because he was de facto assistant president to his brother, the president. Here he is in quote-unquote pillow talk, which means laying in bed after or before sex, and Bobby is telling her this, that, and the other. Loose lips sink ships. So very dangerous if this information got into the hands of their enemies, or even domestic enemies like the Republican Party, the enemy of Jack Kennedy and the Democrats. I mean, this was really sensitive stuff. This is where the rumor started that, or not a rumor, but this is where many, many people also have said that the very night that Marilyn died, that Peter Lawford was sent there before the police were called to quote-unquote clean up the scene and find that damn diary, and that Bobby had been there supposedly the very day of her death, earlier that day, pleading with her to have the diary because the diary contained sensitive information. So the way the story goes is that Marilyn was going to clean house. She was going to, very important, 2 months earlier, Marilyn had been fired from Something's Gotta Give. I mean, by this time she had dropped 26 pounds. She was living on basically champagne and oysters. She had low blood sugar all the time, but people didn't know about that in 1962. She could never sleep. She was acting erratically, and the relationship, especially then the breakup with Bobby, was crazy. What was driving her mad again? People in the movie business, people higher ups, Spyro Scaros, Leviathan, the people at 20th Century Fox said the woman should have been in a mental institution, that she was not sane. Others say, she was sane, just very neurotic and upset at the time. She could never come to work on time, and she was fired, and then the entire company shut the film down, put a lot of people out of work, and they let her know about it in the trades. Marilyn was at a really low ebb. But as a couple months went by the time August came around, they were going to restart the film, and she said she was wholly committed to it. Dean Martin didn't want to work with another female co-star. He was being sued, actually, because of that. But supposedly the film was going to be restarted, and she was in a good place. Certainly not a suicidal place. The film was going to be restarted, and they also gave her a contract to do a film after that, ostensibly with Frank Sinatra, called What a Way to Go. And that would have been filmed sometime after Something's Gotta Give's release. So Marilyn's career was coming back. She was on the upswing. They were going to hire her back. However, word came down from Rose Kennedy to break it off with Bobby Kennedy. So Marilyn tries to call the Justice Department. He has his line cut off. She can no longer communicate with him, obviously way before cell phones. Bobby Kennedy's secretary is interviewed saying, yes, she was calling all the time, and then she couldn't get through to him, and she was going crazy. And Bobby Kennedy, the weekend before she died, had to come down to Los Angeles, and supposedly Lawford was told to get her out of there. So they brought her up to the Calneva Lodge in Lake Tahoe, and they said that was sort of like what they called a rehearsal for death. She was in terrible emotional shape that last weekend, and supposedly Sam Giancana, the mob boss of Chicago, had his way with her that weekend, and not only had his way with her, but apparently did some really abusive stuff to her. And Frank Sinatra was there and knew about it, and they took pictures with Frank Sinatra, and supposedly the photographer said those pictures he took with Marilyn, burn them, and they did burn them, that she was at her lowest point. And when she found out that Peter Lawford and Sinatra, asked her to go as a friend with them to Calneva Lodge, when she found out that the real reason was that they wanted to get her out of LA because Bobby had to come down to LA for some function, she went ballistic. And then she said, if Bobby Kennedy does not come down this weekend, this is the following weekend now, and tell me in person why it's over, why he won't speak to me, why he made me promises, he said he was going to marry me. If he doesn't come down in person, I'm going to hold a press conference on Monday morning. Now, she dies on Saturday, and following Monday, she told many people that she was going to hold a press conference. Not one person is interviewed, even into the 80s, saying she was going to hold that press conference. Many people, several people at least, were interviewed in book and on film saying, Marilyn told me this, that, and it all jives with what the other person has said. I'm going to hold a press conference on Monday morning. And many of them use the same phrase. I feel like I've been treated like a piece of meat, tossed around from one brother to the next. I'm not going to let them get away with it. And she said, I'm going to clean house. She was going to get rid of Greenson, the psychiatrist, that may or may not have been sleeping with her and jeopardizing his license and might have gone to jail for it. I'm getting rid of Paula Strasberg, who she brought on all of her film sets, Lee Strasberg's wife, the acting coach that all the directors hated. They called her the Black Witch because she wore black all the time and the black rimmed glasses, and Marilyn would look to her to approve every take. And much to the chagrin of all the directors, she was going to get rid of... She might have been in talks to get back together and start seeing Joe DiMaggio again. Joe, who loved her to death, who was crazy about her, would have done anything for her. Her life was changing radically for the better. But she did something very dangerous and supposedly threatened to hold a press conference on Monday. And Bob Slater, her one-time lover, who was interviewed for decades and wrote a book afterwards, said he took her out to Malibu and he said, this is very dangerous what you're proposing to hold this press conference. Anyway, rumors are the neighbors there at 5th Helena Drive, where Marilyn lived, were interviewed saying, we saw Bobby Kennedy come to her house that day. Supposedly, people saw a helicopter land at 20th Century Fox, drop Bobby Kennedy at Fox Studios because he was supposed to be up north at the home of a friend of his named John Bates, who lived in Gilroy, California. Bobby was supposed to be, they had given the Secret Service or the Justice Department had given Bobby a suite that last weekend, a suite at the St. Francis Hotel in San Francisco at the penthouse of the St. Francis as offices, but he was going to stay with John Bates in Gilroy at Bates's Ranch there. But even the mayor of Los Angeles, or the later mayor of Los Angeles, Sam Yorty, said that he was aware. Sam Yorty is on camera saying, mayor of Los Angeles, saying he was aware that Bobby Kennedy actually was in Los Angeles that weekend. And the whole reason, supposedly, he was secretly in Los Angeles was because Marilyn demanded that he come and tell her in person, or she was going to hold this press conference. And you know what? They believed her. Like I said, supposedly Bobby Kennedy was secretly brought in by a helicopter that landed at Fox Studios, her studio, by the way, and then flown out to Peter Lawford's house at the beach at Santa Monica, and then Lawford drove him over to Brentwood to Marilyn's house during the day. Supposedly Lawford paced the pool while he said, Marilyn, we need the book and it's over, and I'm sorry to break your heart or your feelings, but this is the way it has to be. And Jack's running for re-election in 64, and I'm going to run for president, and this just can't continue. And she said, supposedly went crazy and said, I hate you, get out of here. And there's other people who say that they heard tapes that were made because her house was bugged. Her house was definitely bugged. She was being bugged by the mafia, by the FBI. Veronica Hamill, who later went on who was an actress who was on a show called Hill Street Blues in the 70s, owned the house after Marilyn and said that the wires were everywhere. I've been in the house twice, by the way, and they found the bugs. Supposedly the bugs, other sources who listened to the tapes say that they could hear the sound of thrashing around and throwing Marilyn maybe on a bed, looking through the closet for the infamous red diary. Bobby Kennedy saying, we have to have it, we have to have it. Maybe a doctor coming in and giving her an injection. Did Dr. Greenson then come by and kill her? There's the one ambulance driver from Schaefer Ambulance says the ambulance was called that night Anyway, let's back up a second. So let's take the theory that Marilyn has the huge fight with Bobby Kennedy and then kills herself that evening. Well, supposedly the night before, there was a woman that was calling repeatedly, and this was a Jeannie Carmen, her friend, said that a woman was calling, and Marilyn said she didn't think it was Ethel, Bobby's wife, but she thought it was someone Ethel put up saying, leave Bobby alone, you slut, leave Bobby alone. If you don't leave Bobby alone, you're going to pay. Well, all we know is the very next night, supposedly Bobby comes there, has a huge fight with Marilyn, looks at the red diary, leaves, and Marilyn dies sometime during the evening. Now, the biggest indicator that she didn't die at, midnight or 11 or 3 in the morning when the cops were finally called by the very nervous housekeeper. Jack Clemens, the first cop, said the housekeeper, Eunice Murray, was very nervous, took a long time to come to the door, was scurrying about. He heard whispering. She was doing laundry, which was very odd, at 3 in the morning. And Ralph Greenson, her psychiatrist, was there, and her doctor, Hyman Engelberg, was there, and he said they were all acting very arrogant and suspicious and just wanted to say it was a suicide, cut and dry. By the way, there was no glass of water or glass of anything in the bedroom. Supposedly she downed a bunch of pills, but where's the water? What'd she drink them down with? And the contents of the stomach did not match what was in the bloodstream. That's another mystery. But supposedly Marilyn, for some unknown reason, because they'll never admit the affairs with the Kennedy brothers, decides to commit suicide that night when she's got the movie to come back to. She's got the next movie lined up. She's possibly starting a new relationship with her ex-husband, Joe DiMaggio. And she's got friends that are there for her and everything else she had. She had just bought this house, her first house she ever owned. She had just been down to Mexico, possibly having an abortion with Jack Kennedy's baby. It's another theory. She had just been down to Mexico buying furniture. Things were looking up. But Arthur Jacobs, according to his wife, Arthur Jacobs is dead now, but his wife Natalie says she was at they were at the Hollywood Bowl, and around 9 o'clock a page ran up to this, before cell phones and beepers obviously, or pagers. Someone at the Hollywood Bowl said, Mr. Jacobs, there's an urgent call for you backstage at the Hollywood Bowl. That's how important it was. You've got to come back here and take it. Jacobs then, according to his wife Natalie, comes up to her and says, you may not see me for a few days. Marilyn is dead. It's a nightmare. I've got to get over there. And he was publicity for 20th Century Fox. So supposedly Pat Newcomb, Arthur Jacobs, the publicity people were at Marilyn's house. This was 9-10 o'clock, and the Dr. Greenson said she wasn't discovered till much later in the evening. A lot of inconsistencies, folks. Eunice Murray, the guys are at it. Eunice Murray, the housekeeper, this is crazy. Eunice Murray, the housekeeper, who might have been also a psychiatric nurse employed by Greenson to spy on her, heard that as well, that Eunice Murray was sent on many trips to Europe after Marilyn died. She didn't have that kind of money. Theory is the Kennedys paid her off to get out of town so she couldn't be questioned. Okay, so Eunice Murray in 1986, when interviewed by Anthony Summers, supposedly off camera said, why should an old lady like me have to keep lying about this? And she says on camera, and I've seen it many times, she says, Bobby Kennedy was there that day, the day Marilyn died, and then his protectors had to step in and, protect him. And that was a huge revelation. That basically is the admission. Did Marilyn commit suicide? I absolutely don't believe so. Did she accidentally overdose that night after the fight with Bobby and the rejection and all that? It's possible. It's possible. Was Marilyn murdered? That's very possible too. However, as time goes by, I'm starting to think that's a little bit less likely, unless Greenson killed her because he was afraid of the press conference on Monday. That's the motivation. They would have to kill her. But look at these guys. Wow. But I don't believe the mob murdered her, if anybody murdered her, because she was great to keep around to blackmail the Kennedy brothers with. I really don't know. I really don't know whether it's an accidental death or murder. I think there's good evidence for both. Very good evidence for both. But again, even if it were an accidental death, why did Eunice Murray and Greenson take so long to report it? Why were they acting so suspiciously? And if she was really dead at 9, why did it take them till 3 a.m. to call the cops and say emphatically she committed suicide? Why was there no drinking vessel in the room? What did she drink down the pills with? I hope I don't run out of time. If I do, I'm going to add a postscript later. But it's all very, very mysterious, folks. Very mysterious indeed as to what happened in Monroe. I think, like I said, I think it's equal between accidental death and murder. I absolutely do not believe she consciously took her life, and that whole, say goodbye to the president, that's bullshit. I think that's a story concocted by Peter Lawford or told to somebody. Fred Otash, look up Fred Otash, Freddie O. He was like the Anthony Pellicano of his time. He worked for the mafia. He worked for Hollywood celebrities. He was a private investigator with offices in Hollywood on Laurel Avenue. He swears that not only did he have tapes and hear the tapes that were made that day, that night, of Bobby coming and rummaging around and threatening Marilyn and looking for the tapes and looking for the red diary and getting a doctor to sedate her. But Otash also claims that late at night, Lawford came to his office completely drunk, completely wasted, saying, Marilyn's dead. I went over there to clean up things. They sent me over there, but I don't think I did a good enough job. You've got to get over there and take any incriminating evidence. This is what Otash says, who really had no reason to lie. Otash actually died kind of mysteriously several years ago before he could write his book. So, it's just very interesting. I've gone way over and I could go longer, but Marilyn Monroe's involvement with the Kennedys is what ultimately killed her, whether it was an accidental suicide or murder. With very important people. Dorothy Kilgallen, by the way, the famed columnist, wrote, Marilyn Monroe is involved with somebody now bigger, I'm paraphrasing, somebody bigger than Joe DiMaggio. And they were writing about Marilyn. They called them blind items in those days. They were getting close to the story. In fact, they knew the story. Today it would be all over the internet, but they were getting close. And I think the fear in the Kennedy family was they were going to reveal it. They were saying Marilyn is involved with very, very famous people and the highest levels of government. And not only that, there's a tape I have heard of Ralph Grimson, psychiatrist, might have been having an affair with her as well. She was going to fire him. She was going to hold a press conference and name him as well and all his dirty deeds. And Greenson, I've heard a tape of Greenson on the phone with the man I mentioned earlier, Bob Slater, who was Marilyn's one-time lover. And Greenson says, and again I'm paraphrasing, you can't beat this. You can't make this up. Greenson says to Bob Slater, I guess it was sometime in the 70s, he says, listen, Bob, he says, I hate to draw a line and say, this is what I can say and this is what I can't. But that's what I have to do. I can't, there are things that I cannot reveal the truth. And the last thing he says, or the last thing that Anthony Summers in this tape that he obtained from Bob Slater says, he says, Bob, and Bob says, yeah. He goes, listen, Bob, he says, you want to know? And he says, ask Bobby Kennedy. And that's the end of the tape, or at least the tape that we've heard. So something happened, folks. Kennedy's involved. Was the mob involved? FBI, CIA, who the hell knows? Cubans, I doubt it. That's a stretch. But I believe Marilyn, like I said, either was it accidental death or was it suicide. It was 60 years ago, but it's still important, really important. And today with the internet and with cameras and cell phones, it wouldn't have happened. And with the press openly talking about their hatred for, let's say, a president, a la Trump, with the media not afraid to voice, acting as editorial journalists instead of non-biased reporters, which they used to be or pretend to be, but they're certainly not anymore. The press would never let this go if there were a politician or politicians involved in a celebrity affair and or death. My God, can you imagine? This would be, the biggest scandal of the decade. So today it would come out. 60 years ago it was hidden. Watergate is when things changed and when, things couldn't be really hidden anymore. Anyway, long video. Sorry to keep it so long. The very mysterious death of Marilyn Monroe. I'm Ron. Guys, if you like the channel, please subscribe. I need to take a breath now. If you do subscribe, please hit the little bell icon next to the subscription button and you'll be notified as to when I post. And please give likes. And guys, comment on this one. I'd like to see your comments. I really appreciate them. A lot of deep thinking people out there, and I love you guys the most. Thanks. I'll see you at the next location. Bye-bye.